And with the judge's ability to literally do a 360 in the room and be able at any point to see everything against each other, it really gives you a whole nother perspective as opposed to comparing things in a bubble. So, when you independently do a review of a projector, you may think it's amazing. And every projector you look at is fantastic, right? But you don't really understand how it compares against something else unless they're right there next to each other.
To our sponsor, Q Acoustics. From the affordable but high-performance 3000i series to the new advanced 5000 range through to the high-end Concept family. Make Q Acoustics your entry point, your next sonic step up, or your end-all for your hi-fi and music listening journey.
Welcome to the 2023 Laser TV Showdown. I'm your host and founder, Brian Mitchell, and I am joined by the proprietors of this showdown, Brian Gluck, the owner of projectorscreen.com since 2014. And how you doing, Brian?
I'm doing excellent, Brian. Thanks for having me.
All right. We're also joined by Rob Sabin, the editor-in-chief of projectorcentral.com, who's an industry veteran, been covering projectors and video technology for years. Welcome, Rob.
Hello there.
And, of course, from acoustics.com, our editor-at-large, Chris Boyland. Hey, Chris.
Hello. Hey. Happy to join you guys today.
Well, all right. So we got a lot to talk about. There were 9 projectors, UST Projectors. Let's go over the official name.
It is the 2023 Laser TV Showdown, the ultimate UST Projector Shootout.
All right. Okay, and let's go over how'd you guys come together? How many years have you been doing this? Who came up with the idea first?
It's been a couple of years, but I got to give Brian the credit for having kind of approached us on this. It's something that we thought about at Projector Central for a while and couldn't really figure out how to handle all the logistics associated with it. It's kind of a big deal to put one of these things together. And Brian, was, to his credit, was always saying, how can we work together? Is there something we can do here? And ultimately last year, for the first time, we did kind of pull it together. He's got both the facility for it. He's got access to the projectors. And, we at Projector Central bring the expertise to pull it off. So it turned out to be a pretty good partnership. And here we are doing the repeat in 2023.
Well, so I'll say we had the facility already set up because it's in our office building, right? So we utilize this room as a demonstration space, also kind of like a testing lab. So we ended up taking over this additional suite in our office sometime, early last year. And that's where we held an event with AVS Forum, which we called the UST Showcase, and then subsequently the inaugural Laser TV Showdown with Projector Central. So last year, we were fortunate to have a contributing sponsor. It was Spectra Projection, who had provided us with a slew of the screens used in last year's event, which we still maintained in our showroom. And they donated a couple additional units for us for the expanded number of competitors that we had this year. So the facility was kind of already in place. We've already been using it for similar types of events such as this. So logistically, we didn't have to rent a hall or we didn't have to scramble to get things done from a facility standpoint. And then it was a matter of getting all the other gear, right? So when it came to the projectors that were utilized, I'm a retailer for many of those products. So we were able to yank units off of the shelf. And there were some other units that Rob had decided he wanted to include that I don't necessarily have access to. So we had to buy them from a competitor, in order to be able to have retail units in the competition and avoid the trap of golden samples or juiced up units or other things that often find their way into reviews and competitions.
Yeah. And again, to Brian's credit, when we signed on to do this last year, we put in the criteria that it really had to be something that had to be handled independently by us as an editorial entity. I think there's always questions when you're working with a retailer on an event like this. And one of the qualifications is if there's a product of interest out there that just happens to be something that Brian doesn't sell, we're still going to keep it in there. And we had a couple of products this year that were not actually officially on his rolls. So he worked very hard and diligently to actually get those extra products in where I couldn't supply them. So worked out well.
And I know there were 9 models in the competition, but there's always one or two models left out that people like to Monday morning quarterback and go, why wasn't this model added? And what can you talk about? Because I know LG and Samsung and a couple Hisense models were not in the competition.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll cover a few of those. So the first thing that we should talk about is LG in particular, because one of the things that we did in coming up with what we were going to, a lot of new models out this year, and in looking over what we could do, we did 14 projectors last year in 2 separate sessions, but we decided this year to actually use our afternoon session to handle the lifestyle projectors, which we'll talk about later. So we were really kind of keeping it to what we could fit into the room, which was absolutely at its maximum 10 projectors. That's what we could do with the screens. So we actually did start out by selecting a couple of the top models from last year that we thought should be in the competition. And one of them was the LG HU915QB, which has been very, very well received, not just by Projector Central in its review, but by anybody who has touched that projector. And it was the number 2 projector in our competition last year. We did start out with it this year. But when we got into it, we found, we did an auto calibration on that projector, and it looked absolutely perfect on paper. But once we got it into the room on the day of the event and looked at it alongside the other projectors, there was a general feeling that even among some of the judges who had seen that projector before, that it was not looking the way it really is capable of looking. So, the responsible thing to do was to ultimately pull it out of the competition. We did not feel that it was being given a fair shake. And given the fact that it's a very high-end and quite excellent projector that has already proven itself, we thought the right move to make. As far as some of the other products that are out there, something like the Samsung, I made the decision to not include the LSP9T, which a lot of people say, well, big high-end projector, why isn't it in there? But honestly, that projector at this point, if you look at it, is really an aging product. It was the very first triple laser RGB projector out there. And if you look at it against today's competition, there's a lot of laser speckle. And I reported on it in my personal review of that product. I know other people have as well. And that is something that in the newer RGB models, you don't really see. You see it, but it's more severe in some others. I didn't think it was a competitive product by today's standards. So I just left it out. There were a couple of other things that, that people wish they could have seen in there. But with the limited space we had and one session for the USTs, that's, kind of where we ended up.
Cool. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to talk about the Hisense thing, because Hisense is kind of unique in this, where they have multiple different models. So they have the PX2 Pro, which Rob decided to include, and that's a variable focus unit, right? So it's an adjustable image size and it's sold by itself. In their other triple laser offerings, they have the L9H that comes fixed focus in both a 100 and a 120 inch size. Now, those can only be purchased with the screen, which is not the screen that we were using in the competition. So if we had included either of those, it would not be representative of what any consumer anywhere would get, because we wouldn't have used their screen for their projector specifically and everything else using the other ones. And to make it even more complicated, Hisense has a different screen with their 100 inch than they do with their 120 inch. So if we were to even include their 100 inch in the contest, because that's what everything was set for, it would have been so far different than what any other combination would have been. So the PX2 Pro, after calibration, really lines up very similarly to their fixed focused models, which are brighter, non-calibrated. So it just, I think, made sense to Rob, to use the PX2 Pro variable focus. And the same thing goes in their single laser. They have the PL1, which is the single laser variable focus, and the L5H, which is the fixed focus that comes bundled with the screens.
Yeah. And again, that comes down to fairness, because at the end of the day, if you're having to purchase a projector with a matched screen, we really are in no position to put that projector out without the screen that it's matched with. So it made more sense to use the variable focus models.
Gotcha. So the screen that was selected, though, is that a typical screen that a consumer is going to buy, or are they going to choose from a number of screens?
You want to jump on that, Brian?
Yeah, totally. So the screen that was used was the Spectra Projection Vantage. That is a lenticular screen. So that is the most common type of ambient light rejecting screen technology used for ultra short throw projectors. The Spectra Vantage happens to be one of the better performing ones when it comes to black level, fidelity and clarity, as well as ambient light rejection.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a screen that you recommend when you sell all these projectors.
If you're going to be in a room with where your lights are not going to be off all of the time and you want some level of ambient light rejecting, but also the flexibility to use with the lights down, the Spectra Projection Vantage is a very easy recommendation.
Yeah, we also at Projector Central, whenever we do these UST reviews, we very specifically recommend that lenticular type of screen. That screen is basically a ridge screen that essentially captures the light that's coming up from the projector and bounces it straight out to the viewer. And its ability to reject, particularly the lenticular screen's ability to reject overhead ambient light, is off the charts. These are also very dark black screens. They greatly improve contrast with the lights on and even with the lights off. So it's really a high recommendation if you're planning on really getting the best performance out of a UST projector to have one of these.
Cool. And by the same token, I'm just going to mention, a UST shines the light up at a very steep angle, right? So with the lenticular that pushes the light back out to you, it really reduces the amount of ceiling reflections that you're going to get. So if you were to use a traditional screen like this behind me with an ultra short throw projector, the light is hitting the screen and bouncing right up against the ceiling and totally adding to the ambient light in the room.
Gotcha. So let's jump into the results. I know that people have already read the articles and seen some of the results, in the 4 movie theater won for the second year in a row, which it's not a new model. It's the same model from last year, but were there any firmware updates, anything that made it different?
To my knowledge, there may have been some minor enhancements, but nothing significant. It was mostly bug fixes as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And what's the performance gap between, that's kind of a difficult term, but first place, second place, is there a reason why someone should go for a second place or even a third place model in this competition over the first place winner?
Well, so one thing I could say is the judges' top 3 were determined by the judges after factoring in all of the individual criteria in which they rated on and their overall opinion of the item. So while I think, to answer your question, Brian, is that would really depend on looking at the scorecard, right? So for example, the 4 movie may have been the overall judge's choice. And if I recall, the rankings there for contrast and black level, right, highlighted in red, show that they were the best item for that particular criterion. But if you jump down to the detail and sharpness, you can see that the Leica had the best, or the Ultimia had the best for color accuracy, or the PX2 Pro had the best for motion handling. So depending on the consumer and what criteria is most important to them, they may decide that, all I care about is sharpness. Sharpness is the most important thing to me. Contrast, whatever, I don't care. I only care about sharpness. Well, in that case, they have information provided to them based off of the publication of the scorecard to understand the attribute of the item and how well it did. And if one criteria is more important to them, then I would suggest they use that as the basis for making their decision.
Right. And things like the lag, input lag, there's a bit of a variation there as well. So if they're using it for gaming, they might not pick the 4 movie because it had one of the higher scores for input lag.
Yeah, it's about 40 milliseconds or so.
Yeah, which, casual gaming, no problem. But first person shooter, they might want something in the 20 range.
Absolutely.
I guess the average person might be wondering, when you walked into the room and you saw them all set up, were there a couple glaring ones that were like, oh, that's bad? And then a couple that kind of stood out of wow.
First of all, I just want to say that we didn't really talk at all about the prep on the individual projectors.
Oh, right.
So which we should. We got to do a shout out here to Sammy Prescott Jr., who is a contributor, regular contributor, Projector Central, also has his own company, AV Chromacal. Absolutely a top-notch professional calibrator, works on a lot of the high-end projectors and flat panels. He did all the calibrations on these. So when they, and really part of the process is to try to sort of perceptually match the projectors to one another to the extent that it's possible. What I would say about your question, Brian, is that it kind of depended on what you were looking at. And there were certain things that we put up where everybody would look around the room and go, oh, look at that one because it was so much better, for example, or look at that one because it was failing some sort of a torture test. But by and large, on a lot of the content, they really looked pretty similar. And you got to give the judges some credit. They really, really dug in to see and see the differences between these products. It was fun to watch them.
Yeah, I mean, the scoring between HDR mode and SDR mode, you kind of separated the scoring there. What do you think? What do you think accounts for that variance? Like, is it just image processing at that point?
I think that's going to depend a little bit on the room lighting and how the projectors were set up for those individual things. And, that's really going to have a lot to do with also the content was different. I did select some different types of content, particularly for the SDR viewing, knowing that that type of thing, you're looking at sports, you're looking at TV, sort of traditional video-based TV viewing, as opposed to, say, difficult movie content that you'd normally try to look at in a dimmer room. So I think it's a little bit of all of that at the end of the day. But most of it has to do with just how the projector manages in the light. One of the things we did this year was, and I'll give Brian some credit with coming up with a kind of a system for it, but we wanted to make sure that when we turned on the lights to do the lit room viewing, that we had essentially even light on all the projectors. The room that we tested in has very, very harsh overhead office type lighting. It is not evenly distributed. So this year we made the effort to have clamp lights on the back of every single screen. We had a pair of clamp lights. They were positioned up at the screen to create kind of a soft, we used traditional soft, at the ceiling, living room lighting. And we thought, very even lighting that was bright, certainly bright enough to read in, I would say, without a doubt. Ultimately, when you got these clamp lights going on 9 or 10 screens, but it was sort of soft, warmish light, and ultimately the projectors had to sort of work with that. So,
right. And was the same winner, I think, for the dark room and the daylight room, both that same model, that same 4 movie?
Well, not necessarily. So if you're looking at this slide right here and you look at SDR day mode, right, what you're going to see is that the Ultimate Thor had top rankings in 2 of the 3 areas, right? Mm-hmm. And that's also the brightest projector in the competition, right, at 4,000 ANSI lumens as advertised. So, overall, I would assume, right, I'm speculating based off of reading the scores and understanding how the judges selected things, that the brightness of that particular projector, played to its strengths as far as the judges were concerned in scoring for it.
Right. And the Epson LS800, which is the other 4,000 lumen projector, happened to come in second. Gotcha. On, for example, color accuracy and skin tone, overall contrast. It also ranked. It looked like it came in third on that one next to the Leica.
Right. And I think people have to remember, with all of the daylight model, or with all of the daylight testing, that if you turn on enough light, all of them are going to start to suffer in some capacity.
They do. I mean, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing, people don't realize anytime you introduce any kind of light into a projection scenario, you're hurting the contrast. If you look at what we did with having 9 or 10 screens active in a room, there's enough light coming off of all of the screens together to really, and the photos show that it's a fairly well, navigatable room with all the screens working, even when the lights are out. But
I saw that you put up some dividers on the edges of the screens to prevent light bleed.
Yeah, we did that
right
this
next
year.
to each other, so that looked pretty good.
Yeah, we did a little bit of testing, and
Yeah.
although it didn't make a huge difference, we wanted to, as best as we could, avoid that criticism about the potential bleed. One of the things about these lenticular screens is that they do have an extremely wide viewing angle, and they have very, very little lateral bounce off the edges. So we did experiment, though, and we found that if we put about a foot worth of blockade between each of the screen junctures, we could prevent any kind of light from leaping over.
Did you end up turning off any of the projectors for individual tests, like in grayscale or what have you, or you left them all on all the time?
No, everything was always on at one time, and I think the judges really appreciated. It took a little while because of the number of projectors. It takes a little while to walk around the room and really look at the differences and see, make your selections about things. But we never did specifically turn off any one thing.
Okay. And if you don't mind, I'm going to answer something else about that, Chris, is that one of the things I think that makes the Laser TV Showdown really unique compared to other comparisons that you may find online or on YouTube or on other blogs is that they're all there at the same time, right? As opposed to leaving anything to memory or trying to take a photo or a video of something and composite that against other things for comparison. Because I can tell you, I've spent an insane amount of time and money trying to be able to accurately record projected video to build a library to be able to compare projectors against each other after the fact. And despite how good I think it was looking at it at the same time individually, when we put the composites of the video together and the two identical projectors next to each other, I've never felt that I could put my seal of approval on the video content as being true to life with what we're seeing with our eyes. And we've hired professional videographers. We've had color correction people in here. I mean, like, I've driven my marketing department nuts with the amount of time and energy they spent trying to produce me something that, I'm willing to put forth as definitive because it's such a difficult thing to capture.
Yeah.
And with the judge's ability to literally do a 360 in the room and be able at any point to see everything against each other, it really gives you a whole nother perspective as opposed to comparing things in a bubble. So, when you independently do a review of a projector, you may think it's amazing. And every projector you look at is fantastic, right? But you don't really understand how it compares against something else unless they're right there next to each other, at least from my perspective, right? So it's a real unique opportunity to have a level of comparison done at the same time that, most of these people will never have other than being invited to be a judge at the Showdown.
Right.
Right. So one of the things that you did differently this year was the single laser with the triple laser projectors are combined now into the shootout. Is there any reason to go for a single laser at this point with so many triple lasers on the market that are so good?
Cost?
Yes, there is, right? Look at our judges' pick. Number 2 was the Epson LS800, which is a single laser. So it's an interesting question. And Rob, flag me down and tell me to shut up at any time because, I like to talk as we all.
I'll add to it.
All right. So, one of the things that we did last year was we had them separated, right? Because, there was the concept of the extra wide color gamut. It's really going to give an advantage for these guys. And it's not really fair for the single laser. But, some of these single lasers have attributes that are in some areas that are stronger than the triple lasers, right? You could have a single laser with much better contrast than one of the triple lasers. You could have a single laser with better motion handling or higher brightness or it could excel in every area essentially aside from wide color gamut, right? And then the thought is, is the average consumer beginning their journey by segregating, I'm either going triple laser or single laser? And, as Rob and I discussed it, I don't really think that we think that is the first decision anyone is making as they embark upon this journey. And we thought it made sense to let them all compete against each other and see how it goes. The triple lasers will generally be more expensive, right? And if budget is a higher priority for a particular consumer, that may exclude some of the higher ranking triple lasers. But, the single laser, such as the Epson, had the lowest lag time for gaming. It has the shortest throw distance, to be positioned to the screen. It's got zero chance for laser speckle or for rainbow effect because it is a single laser. So, there's absolutely a reason that a single laser projector may be preferable to a particular customer as opposed to a triple laser.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And from a pure perspective of just judging these projectors, because we did have to put some thought into that. I really, when you get right down to it, the projectors are going to look the way they're going to look. Let's get them all tuned up as well as we possibly can and put it out there. I was wondering if we were going to have any surprises where you had a less expensive single laser projector that competed effectively with the triple lasers. The only place that I think, if you look at the results, the only place that you can kind of see a little bit is when we get into that area that we called wide color gamut, where we threw some stuff up that very specifically pushes out to the boundaries of DCI P3, and then you could see that some of the triple laser projectors did a little better because they've got the gamut. But it doesn't always play out that way in terms of, as Brian was saying, contrast or detail sharpness or any of the other things. So
I have the Epson LS800 on the screen, and that was one of the ones Brian was just highlighting. You're making a pretty good case for it, as it has low gaming lag, it has high brightness. It just failed in a couple key categories that the judges noted. But in terms of sales, because I know you sell these online at projectorscreen.com, do you just push people towards the 4-movie ones, or how do you navigate the customer towards purchasing a model?
Well, it's really, my sales team are a solutions-oriented group, right? So, for example, if you contact us and you say, hey, I'm interested in an ultra short throw projector. Well, then the conversation begins. Okay, what's the type of content you're going to be watching? What's the environment like? What's the screen size that you're going to use? Do you plan on using the onboard audio? Are you a gamer? Do you want 3D, right? So it's really a matter of like a Q&A with the particular customer to determine which is the right projector for them. So, for example, if someone said, I want to use it to watch sports, it's going to be my TV replacement. While the sun is shining in on Sunday morning, I'm watching football, and I want to play video games, and I don't want this thing obtrusively into my room. Well, it's pretty easy for my sales team to be able to make the recommendation of the LS800. By the converse, if someone's like, listen, I'm going to use this mostly in the evenings or with the lights dimmed. I want the best contrast because I have an OLED in my bedroom and I don't want to be going from, really great black levels to, gray at best and various other types of things. Well, then the team may be making a recommendation of the 4-movie or perhaps something else as well. So, and then you get into budget, right? So
I have the Leica on the screen, which is the $10,000 one.
$9,000.
$9,000. The
Starting
most expensive one that didn't win. It lost to the $3,000 4-movie in many categories, but did come in third place in the competition. But it's the most beautifully built one out of all of them. Like if you're showing off the projector in your room, you want this one on your console.
Just don't turn on the speakers.
Right. We'll get to the audio. But maybe that's a good pivot towards speakers, Chris, because all of them do have built-in speakers.
They do.
And my question to the panel is, are people using the built-in audio, or are they just exporting it to a receiver, to a home theater system, or to a sound bar?
I think, sorry to jump in, but I think Brian made a point before we were recording that, and it's a good point, is that these are really made to stand alone in a room, and their design has the speaker, like front and center in the unit itself. So you can't just pop a soundbar in front of it easily without messing up the aesthetics. Of course, you can get a cabinet that can handle that. Of course, it can have a little space for the center channel right underneath. And you can add a multi-channel system, but I don't think there are as many sonically transparent UST screens out there where you could really build the system into the wall. Maybe, Brian, you can tell me if I'm wrong about that. If you're doing a really high-end screen.
Acoustically transparent screens, designed for ultra short throw projection.
So I think other than portable projectors, I think USTs are the most likely for people to use the built-in sound because they are trying to buy it as a TV replacement.
I fear more people are using it than should be.
I agree.
But particularly after our testing. So.
Right. So, like some of these, as Rob and Chris will discuss, because they were the audio judges, some of them are pretty capable audio devices. But, from my perspective, if you're thinking of this as like a cinematic experience, how do you have a 10-foot wide image and a 18-inch wide total soundstage? Now, granted, they do disperse out to the sides, but it's really not the same as having a traditional LCR at the very least, let alone surround sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up the audio scoring here in a second. Chris, because you were actually there for the audio judging. You got to hear them all. Were they all positioned in the same spots when you?
Yeah.
Rob.
You want to talk
Rob,
about that, Chris? And
sure.
Many thanks to you, by the way, for coming in and helping out with that. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope to visit that place a lot in the future now that I know how to get there. It's a little tricky where you have to go in that back driveway and then look around for a sign that isn't there.
Shh, it's a secret.
Oh, that's why. Right. It's a secret. But now I know how to get there. Rob did a pretty good job walking around the room and, testing for slap echoes and trying to find the best area in the room that, is kind of the deadest sound in terms of things that we don't want added. Right. I mean, you're going to get a little bit of reverb from the room naturally and you can't really get away from that. But behind where we were placing the projectors, there were some boxes to kind of diffuse the sound a bit. It was in an area of the room that didn't get a lot of slap echo. So I think it was a pretty good place to gauge the sound. And we did move each one of the projectors into that same spot for the audio testing. So they would all be kind of comparing apples to apples. And I think we made the mistake of starting with the most expensive projector in the bunch thinking, well, this one's got to sound good, right? And we looked at each other and Mark Henninger was in another part of the room and he just started laughing because to think that you could pay $9,000 and get sound that we were hearing was a surprise, to say the least. I don't know, but I just think that the Leica team, if they want to create a standalone projector that people are going to use the built-in speaker, they need to work on it.
Yeah. I'll talk about that a little bit because I think it's important to point out that Leica projector is basically built on a triple laser Hisense platform.
Right.
So they started out with that. They, of course, added their own lens to it. They did some tuning on some of the modes, but basically, you're looking at a Hisense triple laser projector. I did the audio testing last year by myself, and by far the two Hisense products that we had in the competition were the worst sounding of the bunch. So what I believe happened here with Leica is nobody told them, no, you don't really want to do this. You probably want to update the audio before you release this. Yeah. And it is unfortunate because it's a beautiful, stunning thing. You certainly will not be putting you will not be putting a sound bar in front of that product.
No, exactly.
But we do know that with this type of a product, the odds are very good it's going to be specified by an integrator, a custom installer who is then going to put the sound into the room elsewhere. So I don't know that it's such a big issue for them. I think it's more of an issue if you look at the Hisense products on the rankings. They came in very low here, and if you're buying those projectors, you're going to want to be thinking about what to do. We should talk about the tiers and what the tiers actually represent here. So although we do have individual scores that give you some sense of how the projectors performed in each of those criteria, basically the tiers are as follows. Tier 1 sound is what I would call very good to excellent audio quality. The 4-movie theater, for example, has a B&W created sound system, and it sounds that way. You could read my results from last year where I got into some detail about each of these projectors. It sounds really stunning, except of course, most of these lack bass. That's the biggest issue. So, and the 4-movie Cinema 3, which is their inexpensive single laser projector, actually turned out to also sound very good. It is not a branded sound system. But those are the systems that you go, wow, that's really impressive audiophile quality. The tier 2 projectors are the projectors that, you could live with it. Even an audiophile, would find that he's not offended as long as he doesn't push the system too hard. Right. So those are products that you can say, okay, this will work for my secondary system. We always recommend a better sound system if you're going to be enjoying movies and and television. But if you don't have that capability, you can live with that. The tier 3 systems, those are the ones you really don't even want to ask your dog to listen to. So
Oh, no.
Those are the ones where, if it falls into tier 3, you absolutely want to plan on getting some kind of a backup audio system for the product. So
well, dogs have better hearing than humans, so you definitely
right.
wouldn't want to ask them to listen.
Absolutely, yeah. But so that's kind of how we did it with the tiering, and Chris and I pretty much agreed on just about every criteria and just about every product. What you're seeing there is sort of a conglomeration. We're in a couple of places where we disagreed by one number. I went one way or another when we created the actual final scores, but
our scorecards were pretty close. I mean, just
they were.
them
We were hearing the same stuff. We really were.
Exactly.
Yeah, and laughing at the same stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
So as we wrap up the ultra short throw category, what were some of the takeaways for you after it was over? What were some of the surprises that you recall from the event? Maybe start with Brian on this one.
Sure. Well, so I was not in the room for the entirety of the event, right? So, I did pop in here and there to overhear what the judges were saying and to, glean some of my own opinions on things. But by no means did I have my nose up against the screens and, following along with everything that, Rob had directed them. So at certain points where I did come in there, I would be on the other side of the room working on something and I'd hear the whole crowd be like, ooh, so I'm like, well, I got to go see what's going on. Right. And a lot of that, really, was not terribly surprising to me. I mean, they were oohing and eyeing over items that I expected them to ooh and ah over based off of my experience with these products, as well as, some of them being in last year's. I don't want to, because I didn't follow along with what the judges saw, and I don't want to undermine what their opinions are. I think the biggest surprise for me was that they really liked the Leica. Sorry, Leica. I mean, I didn't scrutinize it to the level of sharpness and look at the test patterns that the judges did to really set it apart. But when I popped in there, you could really see that it had just horrible contrast. And maybe it was its position between very strong contrast performers, but in dark video content, I was not impressed. So I think its overall picks from the judges was a surprise to me. But that being said, I didn't see everything that they saw for the extent of time that they did and looking at the specific criteria.
So the Leica came in with high expectations because of the price and because of the...
I don't want to say high expectations. It actually did better than I thought. Because it's built off of not just the Hisense unit, but last year's Hisense unit, right? The G platform instead of this year's H, which has much lower contrast, for example. So I did expect that its lens would be better because that's what Leica is known for. And it really dominated in the eyes of the judges, anything sharpness related, right? So that lens really is secret sauce, for that particular projector.
Yeah. I hate to be redundant, but so the two, I want to say surprises, but first of all, I did not expect the 4-movie theater, even though it won last year. I really did not expect that to be as strong a contender against the competition as it proved to be. So that was a bit of a surprise to me, that even with all of these new faces, if you will, in the competition, that it was able to show its superiority on a fairly wide variety of content. I wouldn't go so as the other thing was with regard specifically to the Leica. I wasn't really sure how well it was going to do either. The superiority of its lens was so definitive that I was actually shocked that it was that much better from that particular perspective. I, by the way, wouldn't have said that its contrast was terrible, but on a lot of the serious torture test material that we had, it was not pulling out the same kind of shadow detail that some of the others were pulling out. And, we do our best to make these projectors look as good as they can. Who knows if a little more tweaking would have maybe, put it more on even par, perhaps at the sacrifice of some other attribute, because that is sort of the nature of these products. But I will say that those two things, the other thing was that the Epson LS800 which, you can't really say it failed in any way. It came in second, or third in a couple of categories, but that proved to be a unusually strong favorite, I thought. And I wasn't sure that as a single laser projector with fairly limited color gamut compared to the others, that it was going to really fare as well. But it proved to be, despite the high brightness of it, because that's always the challenge, 4,000 lumens, it actually fared pretty well in terms of its contrast. It's got some very good dynamic contrast capabilities. And so that was a little bit of a surprise too, just to see that it was up there. So, that was it. There were a couple of other things that, it was nice to see. I think the Ultimia Thor proved itself to be a pretty good, strong newbie among the group. So that was nice to see.
Cool. And there's one thing, if you jump back to the last slide real quick, Brian, if you don't mind, one thing I want to mention too about like the Hisense PX2 Pro, if I recall correctly, it didn't have top marks in any particular category. I think maybe it did in 24p motion. However, despite not winning in any particular area, it was such a well-rounded unit that, it tied for second place when it came to the judges' pick. So, it really may not have been a master of one, but it was, the jack of all trades that, proved to be a significant value in the mind of the judges. And same thing with the Epson too. I don't believe the Epson really dominated any particular area, but its total was greater than the sum of its parts as well.
I have a small question on the streaming. Is the 4-movie theater still having issues with Netflix because of its platform, or has that been resolved?
No, so all Android TV based projectors don't have Netflix. It's a licensing issue, really. So what happens is you got to go to Google TV or you're using some side-loaded, Android skin type of stuff. So the 4-movie theater does not have Netflix. It may be upgraded to Google TV in the future with licensing. Maybe Netflix does something with Android. I don't know. But, currently you're going to have to use an external streaming device for Netflix with a majority of these products.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with all of them, you want a Fire Stick, a Roku box, or an Apple TV is really going to make all of them a little bit easier to use.
You'll have a larger assortment of supported applications from streaming services with a third-party streamer.
Right.
Gotcha. All right. So there was another category of projectors in this group, and you guys called it the lifestyle category. As I switch over here, these are more portable units. Why would someone buy one of these? I think they're a little bit less expensive.
I think the first question is, what is a lifestyle projector? What does that even mean, right? So I'll try to define it as best as I can. And this is kind of being adopted overall as a nomenclature for a type of projector. These lifestyle projectors, specifically the ones that Rob had decided to include in the contest, they're really good enough to be used as a permanent projector in a traditional type of viewing projection environment. However, they also have other types of features, such as, the streaming applications, onboard audio, geometric correction, and other things. And they're in a portable enough chassis to be brought somewhere. So they're good enough to stay, small enough to go, and good all around. So then who's the customer for that?
Yeah.
Great question. Apparently a lot of people right now. So, what's unique about some of these lifestyle projectors, just as an example, is some of them are actually triple laser, right? There's not a whole lot of I don't think there's any consumer grade triple laser standard throw projectors available outside of these particular lifestyles. And with the triple laser comes an incredibly wide color gamut. So there are, and even Dolby Vision, right? There was a couple entrants in the Lifestyle Projector Showdown that support Dolby Vision also, which you're not getting in a traditional standard throw projector. So, it's really kind of interesting that this small footprint of a product has a lot of these features that, the traditionally larger standard throw projectors have not yet adopted. And I think you may start to see a merger, as these lifestyle projectors may grow larger, and have lens shift and some other features not found in these small particular chassis right here.
So they're really kind of a hybrid. They're not the bigger projector that is more of the traditional size that you would think of in a long throw form. and they don't have to be placed as far deep in the room, but they do have to be a good 6 to 8 feet, I'm guessing.
Well, they generally, it depends on the screen size. So these lifestyle projectors have a far more limited range of optical zoom, if even at all, right? So generally, you're putting this projector in this specific place where it needs to be in relation to the screen and the image size. Where a traditional a traditional standard throw, and I use the word standard as opposed to long. Long throw means something totally different in my universe, like you're putting it 100 feet away to do a 100-inch screen. But a standard throw projector will generally have a wider range of optical zoom for more versatility in terms of its placement. And the better ones will have something called lens shift as well, right? So you don't have to have it dead center. You're able to shift the image over without turning on geometric correction or keystone correction or other things that can affect the fidelity of the image as well. So these are harder to place permanently than your traditional type of standard throw projector, but they're also easily able to be brought somewhere. And if you're doing it more casually and you're on the go and you can live with the geometric correction, which happens very fast on the majority of some of these for casual viewing, they're fantastic. But if you want to have it as your real home theater projector, you really have to be very exact in terms of its placement.
Yeah, the autofocus and auto setup routines on these things, that's really, I think, one of the things that's allowed this category to emerge. The design concept behind this is, what do we have to put into a box so that somebody can simply just take it out of the closet or cart it over, drop it down, and get an image and be looking at a picture within seconds. And that's what happens with these products. You can point them up, the keystone automatically gets fixed. It's perfect focus in just a matter of just a couple of seconds, really. And you get a beautiful, sharp image. And then, of course, Brian mentioned the fact that several of these are triple laser projectors that have wide color gamut, whether it is used or misused. That was one of the things that we were experimenting with when we did our showdown, is another story. But ultimately, you get a lot of projector for not a tremendous amount of money, and you get something that's extremely easy to set up and use. So,
were any of the projectors battery powered, that they could be powered without a direct power source?
Not in this okay. Bunch. We had a couple of options. I looked at a couple of other products that maybe could fall into this quasi category. Yeah. Maybe not triple laser projectors, but single laser models that are portable. And the issue there is that when you get past, if you want something that is either battery powered, or it's possible that some of them, maybe you could use a battery bank on some of them, a large battery bank. But these, for the most part, really require power to go in. You don't get enough brightness out of those projectors that are typically either battery powered or able to be powered by a bank.
And so fine for the backyard, but not for the tent.
I think so. It just sort of depends on what your needs are. But ultimately,
And these are bright projectors, these lifestyle projectors. The lowest brightness one was 1600 lumens. And I believe the highest brightness one was like 2400 lumens, maybe even brighter than that. It was on the scorecard if you jump back to it, Brian. So, these things have comparable levels of brightness of your traditional standard throw projectors. They did well in relatively bright rooms. And surprisingly, some of them support image sizes that are like unbelievable, right? So
300 inches.
Yeah.
We actually, we lent out an X5 to a reviewer who brought it to a movie theater and put it up on a 1,000-inch screen. And
oh my God.
Photo of that projector on a 1,000-inch screen. And by all the math in the world, it's not appropriate number of foot lamberts, right? Like, I don't understand how that this was a viewable image, but it was crazy.
Yeah, the brightest of those projectors, by the way, is 3,300 fancy lumens. Yeah. That's the BenQ 3100i, and then everything else was over 2,000, except for the, I guess it's the Hisense, right? The C1 is 1,600.
So you can get larger screen sizes with these models over the ultra short throw.
They're about the same in terms of. Let me put it to you this way. The cost of getting a larger ultra short throw ALR screen is prohibitive, and the availability of that is prohibitive. Right. But if you're projecting on a wall, I would say that from a brightness standpoint, these are these are kind of in the category of and brighter.
So
The
that's a good
USTs
point.
are in
You
the
don't
same
need-
category or brighter.
Well,
You don't
one
need
thing I would
any-
just mention about that is the ultra short throws will have a defined
Right.
image size that they
Mhm.
can say that they will have a sharp image, right? So
Mhm.
the Epson LS800 and the 4-movie
Oh,
theater,
right, of
for
course.
example, are 150 inches diagonal. One, it has enough light output to make a larger image, but the way the lens is designed, once you go beyond the maximum stated image, you're absolutely going to see softening. And I don't know at what point it becomes, totally unwatchable or not.
And some of them have a fixed focal distance that this is it. It's 100-inch or it's 120-inch, and that's you can't actually change that
Right.
because they
For
don't
the
have an infinitely for the UST projectors.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't particularly understand why anyone makes that decision to do it.
Yeah.
They do say maybe they provide a sharper image because the lens has been machined for that specific size. However, we've seen variable focus products that have amazing sharpness as well. So it's a philosophy that, someone smarter than me may understand and why they've decided to do that.
But with the portable, you can go anywhere from like 4 feet up to, much larger. I mean, because it
much
is continuously
larger range of
variable.
image size, correct.
So on the portable models, 4-movie won again, but was it as decisive?
It
of a
tied,
winning?
I think, right?
Oh,
Wasn't it a tie for first place?
Yeah.
Let me get back to the scores here.
Tied with the BenQ, is that it?
Yes.
Right. So the least expensive and the most expensive, I think, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ended up tying for first place.
I can't find it.
Yeah. Among the judges' picks.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. It seemed like there was a lot less variation in the scoring on the lifestyle projectors, that there wasn't a huge gap in many of the categories, at least. And you did see that at least one projector took first place in something. Right.
Right. That's
So-
a little bit.
Yeah. So in my opinion, right, reading the judges' scorecards, speaking with them at dinner, and understanding more about it, the delta between all of them was not very significant. But realistically, they each have independent features. Like some things excel in certain areas. And this comes down to, if you're a gamer, the BenQ hands down. That is a gaming lifestyle projector, right? That's what it really was built for. And it did, well as a video device beyond just gaming. The JM Go Ultra, which, did not necessarily get picked by the judges, has a very unique feature with its integrated gimbal design, right? So, for example, when you talk about versatility of placement, the JM Go is by far would be my pick, because you can put that thing on the floor, pivot it up very quickly against any surface, and it automatically corrects. Whereas the other 4 units are these cubes, and you have to stack them up on boxes or use shims or do other type of finagling to get them where they want with that JM Go right there, right? So, I think, getting back to what Brian asked before, how do you help a customer decide what's right for them? This is the perfect example. All right. Do you want 3D or not 3D? Are you going to be playing games on it? You going to, have a table that's about the right size, or do you want something you can drop on the floor, and point wherever you want, or point it at your ceiling and watch it in bed? And those types of unique features to each unit make it, in my opinion, would be the deciding factor for a particular consumer.
And these models also have built-in speakers, but we didn't do a test on these.
We did actually.
Yeah, Rob said.
So I actually did a couple of days after the showdown. I did a roundup as well. I used a different room for that than the large projection room. Brian has a smaller room downstairs, and did the same type of process where I set the projectors up. I set the projectors up about a foot or so. I'm going to say it was more like maybe close to 2. I guess from my head, it would have been about 4 to 5 feet in front of me. So I'm looking at the back of the projector, which is set up on a tripod, which is projecting to the screen in front of me. And I'm listening by whatever mechanism that projector spits out its sound. Some of them spit out sound from the side and the front. Some of them spit out sound from the back and the sides. Just sort of depends on the design. So I did do a round of those. And what was interesting there was actually the Hisense C1, which is a JBL branded audio system, and the X Jimmy, which is really a Harman Kardon branded audio system, were significantly better than the others. And very, very good, I have to say, for what they are. I'll also point out that the C1 was the only system the only projector in the entire competition, both USTs and Lifestyles, to which you could actually set the menu and hook up a subwoofer to it, which makes an enormous difference in the sound quality. Chris and we checked every single projector to see whether its 3.5 millimeter headphone or auxiliary output could be used to basically run a sub. And you can, but you can't, it won't track the volume control as you go up and down. So that takes it out of the competition. If these manufacturers would just put in a subwoofer output, you could use almost all of those systems as your primary system with that bass reinforcement. Makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and honestly, the worst sounding ones were the closest, right? Because the Hisense and the Leica each had the option to have the headphone output and the main speakers active at the same time. Mm-hmm. But when you enabled that option, it was a fixed audio level to the subwoofer, which meant it was the same loudness no matter where you had the volume control adjusted. So it seems like they intended for that to work.
It worked on the C1. That was the thing that was remarkable. It was a very similar type of a system, and it actually did work on the C1, and it made a big difference. But I think we put the X-Jimmy and the Hisense into the same category. I think my personal favorite was the X-Jimmy, just by virtue of its general dynamics and the accuracy of the sound. The Hisense was really very close to it, and then the others sort of dropped off after that.
Sure. So I think the two Hisense teams need to talk to each other.
There was definitely
the portable projectors and the USTs to get.
Yes, it didn't quite translate on those USTs.
Yeah.
So I just want to make a point right here too. My personal belief is when we talk about our consumers using the built-in audio, far more likely to be using the built-in audio of a lifestyle projector than that potentially of an ultra.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, manufacturers, listen. We said this to you last year after last year's event. Do what Rob is saying and allow to hook up the subwoofer and control the volumes concurrently as opposed to separately. Make your audio that much better. It should be very simple to do. You've heard it from Rob. You're hearing it from me again. Please do it for the sake of everyone.
Well, I'll give one more suggestion. Why not wireless speaker connectivity to these projectors as well? So you can have speakers in the front of the room, the projector in the middle of the room, that type of.
I believe I'm trying to recall if any of the projectors have any sort of wireless capability. I know a couple of them you can put some surround speakers on with by
I think they're only branded versions. Like the Hisense might have had it, but only for Hisense speakers. Don't quote me on that, but I think there was somewhere in the menu that if you were combining it with the same branded system, you'd be able to do it. But I think what Brian's talking more about is like a WISA kind of an option that would allow you to use a third-party system wirelessly. Which
beyond
would be a nice
that,
option.
you have a speaker in the projector, and one of the most common requested things from customers and people online is, can I use that onboard speaker as my center channel? Because the placement becomes so difficult. Some of these USTs, especially as you get to a larger image size, have a really long throw distance. You could be 2 feet away from the screen into the room with the projector. Then if you have to put like another, center channel in front of it, you're really encroaching on your living space. So
but I think I speak for the audiophiles in the room when I say, what a terrible idea. I mean, let's take the most important speaker in the system. The one where, if you don't get good match and good vocal clarity, everything's just wrong. And we'll turn that now into, the focal point of the sound system. So
of an otherwise excellent sound system.
Right, exactly.
But I will say the Sony TVs have that feature, and some of the OLEDs, the entire screen is the speaker. It's an actual air-based system. And it sounds, I would say, really good with movies because the dialogue is locked right on the screen. You don't have to worry about a separate, center sitting in front of the TV. But I wasn't as big a fan with multi-channel music when I did it that way because you're not getting the timbre match across, the whole front of the soundstage. So I think you'd have something similar. But if you took let's say the 4-movie theater and allowed that whole thing, that Bowers and Wilkins system, to be the center channel, and then you match it with like some B&W sides and surrounds, that would probably sound like
I was just going to say there's pretty good odds that it'll be better than whatever you match it up with, unless you do B&W.
Unless you get some good supporting
the timbre of that system is really outstanding. I'm reminded too that the reason that I liked the X Jimmy so much was that it had a DTS Virtual X mode for surround. That was by far the best of the faux surround modes that I heard in any of the projectors, whether it was the Lifestyles or the USTs. I mean, it worked really, really well, and it made the difference.
I know they weren't compared at the same time, but from memory, were the USTs better overall than the Lifestyle ones, or it was just a case by case basis?
I don't know. Two really different animals. I think from a perspective of video quality and just high performance imagery, the USTs, the best of the USTs, were really, they stood out. I don't believe that any of the Lifestyle projectors came to that level of black level and shadow detail.
Interesting. Any more closing questions, other thoughts that
I would, I guess, make one point is the portable or Lifestyle projectors can all be ceiling mounted, which the USTs really can't. If you try to mount a UST on a ceiling, you can't use an ALR screen because it's bouncing the light that it's supposed to be reflecting. No, you can flip the screen, right? And then you have to put your chair on the ceiling.
Right.
So if you want to watch the movie from the ceiling, sure, ceiling mount to UST. But any of the portable projectors can be ceiling mounted pretty easily, actually. Like Rob mentioned, we were discussing this the other day. You can get a tripod type mount for a ceiling for a portable projector for like $20 on Amazon or something.
Well, by that same token, what I will mention is like the screen you see behind me. This is a Stewart Gray Matte 0.7 gain surface, right? So this surface is compatible with both ultra short throw as well as standard throw, and you can see I'm in a treated room color wise, and I have the ability to turn the lights off. So if you were primarily going to be using this in a more darkened environment where you didn't necessarily need the ambient light rejection, you could absolutely ceiling mount one of these USTs, with a screen such as this. However, it's so difficult to dial those things in. For anyone who has not set up an ultra short throw projector and got it dialed into the screen, there is really no adjustments without affecting the image. Like if you want to do geometric correction, you're affecting the fidelity of the image. So you really want to physically get this thing placed. There's no lens shift. There's no zoom. You've got to follow the offset and the throw distance like to a T to get this thing perfectly dialed in. It's hard enough to do on a table. I would not envy the person doing it on a ladder, holding 25 pounds above them, trying to get that right.
Right.
No, that's a great point. You do have to nudge them perfectly centered, or you're going to be slightly off, or the image will be crooked in some capacities. So there is a little bit of a perfect setup on your console.
Yeah, it is tricky, but you get better at it. The more,
totally. So. You probably go through a lot of cleaning, ladies, right? Because you bumped my projector again.
Yeah, hit it.
Well, we definitely want to congratulate the winners. I know this was a monumental task to put this together. Rob and Brian, I mean, just putting this up, days of work, getting all the judges there. Tremendous underestimated value for the industry. And I want to thank you for that. And congratulations to 4 Movie Theater. If you're in the market, that's one of the ones that won, or that is the one that won first place in the ultra short throw competition. And any closing thoughts?
If I can jump in for a second, there's 2 things that I want to mention. First of all, I realized that we didn't mention our other sponsor, who is AV Pro Edge, who has, and Meridio, who provided all of the infrastructure gear to make this happen. It's many, many feet of very expensive fiber optic cable, along with an elaborate switcher, along with distribution amplification. Jason Dustle over at AV Pro Edge. I know a lot of folks in the business know him. Was so helpful in getting us the gear that we needed, and it worked perfectly this year. Everything was just right on target. So that was great. I also just want to say something about the judges and thank them again for the effort that they put in. I know, Brian, every time you jumped in, you got a chance to see just how active the group was. One of the things about this, I've been a judge myself in these types of competitions, and there's a tendency for people to walk around like they're in lab coats and everybody's quiet and, studying images. And we decided last year that we didn't want that. What we really wanted was a more collegial kind of effort where everybody gets in there, a bunch of hobbyists and reviewers and enthusiasts getting in there and pointing things out to each other so that we could ultimately get, hopefully to the bottom of things. We're not testing the judges on their ability to detect things. We want to find out what the best projectors are. And boy, these guys, really, really embraced it. It was, like I said, really fun to watch them just really get into it. And, the images show a little bit of that, but, it's a lot of effort for several hours on end, and they did an amazing job. So,
yeah. So to touch upon Rob mentioning our other sponsor, Meridio and AV Pro Edge, one thing I want to explain to the viewers here is it's not as simple as just plugging in a splitter and getting 8 signals, or run a signal to 8 separate devices. There's EDID conflicts. There's all sorts of other type of complexities that make this far more complicated than, just buying a $25 switcher, from a giant evil bookstore and plugging things in and magically making everything work. Right.
Yeah. And we had 5 sources that I was able to using. In fact, you can sort of see, I guess it's not on the screen in that photograph, but you can see where I'm sitting there. From my computer, I was able to basically work off of a matrix, a web interface for the switcher, and just click whatever I wanted to the full distribution or to a small monitor that we had to queue things up. And it was, just really an effective setup.
And I guess the thought I would leave the audience with right here is, this was, we appreciate everyone's interest in this and all the buzz that it gets. It's a very resource and money expensive, production to put on. So if you'd love to see one next year, please hit us up. Help us be able to put something like this on,
like a true
on again in the future.
And what's that URL again?
That is projectorscreen.com.
All right.
Right. You can buy all of these on projectorscreen.com.
Almost all of them.
Almost all of them.
Not the Leica.
And no, this has been a great deep dive into the showdown. Did I get that right?
The shoe. It's a great shoe. Yeah.
Showdown. It's not a shootout. It's a showdown.
It's a shootout also. It's just, it's a projector shootout. We can say that.
Ultra short throw projector and the lifestyle category. Yeah, I want to thank our guest today and Brian Gluck from projectorscreen.com, Rob Sabin from Projector Central, and our editor at large, Chris Boylan. I'm Brian Mitchell, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.